1960s were a period of great change in the band world, just as in society in general. More and more quality band programs developed, and younger directors began programming more contemporary and popular music selections. Mr. Willis was widely revered as an elder statesman among his colleagues. He served again as ETS BOA president for 1959 to 1961, and several of his former students were now local directors. During this final decade of his career, Mr. Willis, as usual, adapted his style of marching, music selection, and even the personnel of the band as dictated by the times. Tradition for years had been to give a present to Mr. Willis at the Christmas concerts and spring concerts. The band and chorus often combined forces for these concerts, as in this 1960 example. These presentations often involved gag gifts, as seen here from the 1961 winter concert, a toupee and a tub of Metrical, a popular diet drink. To handle the large crowds at these combined concerts, Mr. Willis and Mr. Sanders began renting the new Civic Auditorium in downtown Knoxville.
The 1960-1961 band was again selected for a Music Educators National Conference performance, this time in Asheville, North Carolina. The drum major that year was Leonard Stone, representing yet another family with 3 generations in music at Central. His children were in the band in the 1980s, his brother also later served as drum major, and his mother had played in the orchestra for Mr. Willis in the 1940s. I'll never forget her telling me after a Gresham concert in the mid-80s that it had been a concert that even Mr. Willis would have been proud of.
I'm David Carell, started here at Central as a freshman in 1960, and graduated in '64. And this, of course, this stage brings back so many memories, as it does everybody that's been on it. Played many, many concerts here on this stage. The first concert as a freshman we played, we had pictures. Well, he couldn't see me because I was too short. So Mr. Willis went to the back of the stage here somewhere and found a couple of old wooden crates, Coca-Cola carton crates, and put them on the chair and said, "David, sit on these." So I did, and so that got me up tall enough for the picture. My first year as a freshman, I didn't make the top band. Very few freshmen ever made the top band. There was only one boy that did, a trumpet player by the name of Junior Atkins, in the fall of 1960. I lucked out that year. The 4th chair tuba player somehow got hit in the teeth. Well, he couldn't play the tuba. And so he asked me, "David, would you like to move up to the top band?" I said, "Wow, yes, sir, I sure would." And they put me in first period band. And then I can remember a couple of weeks down the road in the marching season, he asked us, "How many of you all have memorized your marching music?" And there were 2 people that raised their hand, Junior Atkins and myself, the 2 freshmen. And he bragged on us, and I'll never forget that. That made us feel good. Well, I took that horn home every night. Believe me, my dad picked me up, and we took it home and practiced every night. So I knew my music. At the beginning of my senior year, I told him that I wanted to be a teacher of instrumental music. So he said, "Well, David, if you can, schedule study hall 2nd period so you can come down and be with us during the 2nd band." And there was another young man during that time, Johnny Wooten, who also, he and I together did that during 2nd period. So we got a chance to see him work with the band, and then an opportunity to actually get some podium time and stand on the podium and work with that 2nd band. And it was with that knowledge that it just really fired me up. I was ready to major in music when I went to college. And so that's one of the things that helped to influence me to become a teacher of instrumental music in my 33rd year now of doing that.
The 60-61 band did the overture to Rienzi for festival that year, and it also included a majorette named Beverly Towery. She would end up assisting Mr. Willis in one of his infamous schemes the following year.
I spoke to Beverly Towery Hundley by phone, and it reminded me so much of my conversation earlier with Reba Inkelbarger Haynes. Just as when Mr. Willis wanted to be the first band in the Knoxville area with majorettes, he decided in 1961 to be the first in the area with a female drum major actually conducting the band on the field. He approached Beverly about the position, but asked her to be discreet about it so other area bands would not hear about his plan. She told me that at the time she could not even read music, but just memorize the vocal commands and what to do with her arms. She shared the position with Ben Dugan. and was also still shown in the majorette group photo that year. Ms. Hundley later became a Knox County school teacher, and Mr. Willis took special precautions for her participation in the all-boy band, as Central was sometimes called.
And I know this, wherever we went, she sat on the front seat with him. Of course, all the rest of the bus was boys. Yeah. The fall of 1962, he bought concert tubas for the marching band. And I asked him, why did you do that? The sousaphones, of course, project to the audience. He said, well, David, what I'm trying to do is develop more of a concert sound on the field. Yeah. So he got, from Hughley's Music, he got 4 Olds concert upright tubas. And we used them that fall. And at the end of the fall, I asked him if he was happy with that decision. And he told me, he said, that's the worst decision I've ever made in my life. He said, I have no bottom in the band at all. There's no tuba. Even though you 4 guys play good, it all went up in the air. We couldn't hear it. And then another memory that I have, I guess it was the winter concert of my second year, the sophomore year, we started a little jazz ensemble. And the first little jazz band tune we ever played was Stranger on the Shore, in this very spot right here.
This concert also included Charles Sanders performing Old Man River with the band, and former student Jack Thomas, who is now a Knox County band director, as a featured trumpet soloist.
The festival tune for spring 1962 was Il Guarni, and that year the art club made a project out of decorating the side of the old White Castle. This painting lasted for many years on the old building, but has now been painted over. Beverly Towery had already graduated, but Mr. Willis continued the practice of a female drum major for 3 more years, using one for the last time in fall of 1964.
David Carell remembers performing Like Cavalry Overture some that year, but the judges' sheets show that the primary festival tune for spring 1963 was the 1812 Overture. Among the band's photo collection, I found 2 interesting shots from what seems to be the spring concert in April 1963. The first shows 2 students with a large 25 presentation. Even more interesting is the second photograph. Mr. Willis was evidently presented with a 25th anniversary cake. Given that Mr. Willis came to Central for the 37-38 academic year, this would have been the 25th anniversary of his first spring concert at the school. Another interesting note, I had always heard that due to Mr. Willis's baldness, he was affectionately called Fuzzy behind his back by many students. This picture is evidence that it was not always behind his back, and that he seemed to have a good attitude about the nickname.
The 1963-1964 band was a very mature ensemble with many seniors. Their festival work was Pageant by Persichetti, which earned a Superior, and they performed their spring concert again at the Civic Auditorium.
The marching band posed for this beautiful late afternoon portrait for the 1964 annual. 1963 was the year that Fountain City was finally annexed into Knoxville. After having billed itself for years as the largest unincorporated city in the country, this was not at all popular in the community. There was reportedly a funeral wake down Broadway to show their displeasure. For the schools, it meant that they were now in the Knoxville city system with different supervisors. Mr. Willis had been the instrumental music supervisor for the county all through the 1950s, but with this incorporation, he lost that position. During the 1950s, Mr. Willis had an intense professional rivalry with Jack Cannell, the director at Maryville High School. These 2 bands always tried to outdo each other for festival ratings. However, Mr. Cannell was hired as the new supervisor in Knoxville in 1963, thus becoming Mr. Willis's boss and eventually the person who chose Mr. Willis's replacement. Mr. Cannell began developing a more comprehensive feeder program with band instruction starting in the 4th grade. These enhancements would later result in yet another generation of excellent band programs at Central and across the city. Among the officers in 63-64, we see David Carell, now in his senior year, and his friend John Wooten, who came along with him every day to the second period band to study conducting with Mr. Willis. Like David, John did become a band director, teaching in Knox County for several years before passing away at a relatively young age. David Carell has never forgotten how he got started.
Started in band in 1956 at Shenandoah Elementary, and it was between the 4th and the 5th grade when Mr. Willis would have a summer band program here at the old Central Band Room, and all the schools that fed into Central would come over, and the students that could for a week or two and learn how to play during the summer. And so I came to that, and I wanted to play the tuba like my dad had, but they didn't have a tuba to give me. So I kept asking him for a tuba. Well, we don't have one, David. Would you like to play this trombone? Well, no, sir, I don't want to play that. I want to play the tuba. So he says, well, I'll try to find you one. So sure enough, Mr. Willis went to the old Knoxville High School basement and found me an old E-flat, beat-up silver tuba. Thing had been around for ages. It was old then.
David's father took a few seconds of 8mm film that summer of 1956 during band camp at Central. First, here's David with that old tuba that Mr. Willis dug up for him. The boy at the far left drilling the students on left face may have been Charles Harrington, Mr. Willis observes from the stands. And O'Dell Willis and David Carell. (1964-1965) was a rebuilding year after the graduation of such a strong senior class. Bill Potts had been in the band since 1961 playing trumpet. He was selected as one of the drum majors for fall 1964 and furnished these personal photos, some taken by his parents. Bill later served in the Air Force and is now retired to the Fountain City area. He has had 2 children in our band program and serves to this day as a frequent substitute teacher at Gresham. The band did Fanfare and Allegro by Clifton Williams for festival that year. It was a difficult work that was in a more contemporary style than Mr. Willis's usual selections. With so many young members, the band's 2 rating at festival was the first since the late 1950s. In talking to Mr. Potts, to this day, he still remembers that the band got 2 2s and a 1 from the 3 judges, and he remembers their disappointment at just barely missing that superior rating. This band again held their spring concert at the Civic Auditorium in 1965, and the performance was recorded. Remember Beecher Mize from the 1930s? His sons, Ron and J.B., were in the band by this time and furnished a copy of this recording. We'll hear a few excerpts from this. Among the officers for 64-65, Scott Bolton represents yet another family with several band members over the years. Bill Potts is seen here again. Benny Miller became a music teacher in Knoxville. I taught at Sturkey Elementary with him briefly in the 1980s. Larry Danner is another band director who was inspired to enter the profession by O'Dell Willis. Mr. Danner was a 4-stripe officer, all-state trumpet player, and has spent much of his long teaching career at Farragut Middle School in Knox County. As for the Mize family, They were now in their second generation of CHS Band members. Here are more of their recollections.
I'm J.B. Mize, graduated Central in '67, played in the band starting my freshman year in '63 through '67.
I'm Ron Mize, the much younger brother to this old one here. I played trombone as well at Central from '64 through '68, graduated '68. Time at Central was wonderful, and band was probably one of the highlights of the whole time there. Mr. Willis was just quite a character, and everyone loved being around him. He was quite a unique fella.
And with the band members, it was almost, Mr. Willis never said it, but it was almost within us. Okay, it's halftime, now it's our game. And we didn't just go out there to do the best we can. We did that, but we also went out there to be the best band on the field at halftime as well.
J.B. also served for many years as the announcer for Central's football games.
I worked in the press box one phase or the other and announced from 1992 through 2003.
After graduation, J.B. wanted to be in the UT Band under Dr. Julian.
He had gone and talked to Doc Julian, and think about possibly marching in UT's band. And Doc's question was, well, where'd you go to high school, son? Knox Central. You march for O'Dell Willis? Yes, sir. If you march for O'Dell, you can march in my band. And that was his tryout for the UT band. I was telling a friend of mine that we were going to have this interview, and he graduated from Fulton back in the 50s. And he says it sticks out in his memory like it was yesterday. It was either a Christmas parade or Armistice Day parade downtown. And he said we would see Central dressed in those military uniforms, and we were just in awe.
Mr. Willis saved on expenses by not always using buses for away games that were within the city.
If it was Bearden, we'll see you there at 6:30 or whatever time you were expected to be there on time, but you furnished your own transportation.
And of course, I'm sure everybody was there pretty much.
Right.
Oh,
You didn't
yes.
have a problem with people not showing up.
Of course, back then, the communities changed so much. Back, we used to talk when I was growing up, Mom and Dad would do their grocery shopping on Friday evenings when he would get paid in the old white store down in Fountain City in Broadway. And at 7 o'clock, they closed because everybody in Fountain City was going to the ball game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you had to get your shopping done because that's where everybody in Fountain City was going.
The Mizes mentioned a band spring trip in 1966 to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Cherry Blossom Festival parade. This photograph may have been taken during that performance. Here's another unidentified photograph, but it had to be from sometime in the middle 60s. Notice the all-male company front. As Norman Woodall would later tell me, Mr. Willis told him that he didn't want swaying skirts on the field to detract from the military appearance. The band is also still using the upright concert tubas that David Carell described.
The 1966-1967 annual included the typical shots of the concert band and marching band, but for the first time, not only is the second band actually recognized in the annual, but an assistant director is shown. The second band was called the Cadet Band during this period, and the assistant director was Margaret Dowdy.
I met Peggy in the 1970s. She was teaching in Cookeville at the time, and I assisted her briefly with the summer band program while I was an undergraduate at Tennessee Tech. She was an excellent teacher who was very friendly and easy to work with, a strong asset to the program. She also taught 4th through 8th grade band at Sturkey Elementary School. Band festival music is graded on a difficulty scale of 1 through 6. For most of his career, Mr. Willis had performed a mixture of grade 5 and 6 literature, although primarily grade 6. After the 2 on Fanfare and Allegro in 1965, he took the band in grade 5 in 1966. That year the band got straight superior ratings in every category on Merry Wives of Windsor. He went back to grade 6 in 1967, but the band again earned 2 2s and a 1 on Dvorak's New World Symphony. They also got a 2 in sight reading. The 1968 band, again in grade 6, got straight 2s, but a 1 in sight reading. They played a transcription of the Tchaikovsky Symphony No. 6. However, the old master was not through just yet. Mr. Willis and the band would return to their top form, achieving superior ratings in every category in grade 6 at least twice more before he retired. Here's the 1967-1968 marching band. The band's collection includes a large color print of this photograph. A close look shows a surprising change. Yes, those are women in the marching band. I've never found a definitive explanation for this change in Mr. Willis's long-standing tradition. Even alumni from that period don't seem to remember a detailed explanation being given. However, schools during that era were under increasing federal pressure to equalize treatment of both genders. In addition, it was finally acceptable for women to wear pants, so they could now march without causing the swaying skirts effect that Mr. Willis disliked. Looking back on this time in the band's history, the group was poised to begin yet another long period of tremendous achievement. The feeder school program was functioning at its peak, with Peggy Dowdy, Jack King, Colbert Petrie, and others now sending students to Central who were already outstanding players. The 1969 band did Man and Veen for Festival, thereby initiating a run of superior ratings in grade 6 that would last for a decade. The performance style of marching bands was also beginning to change. The influence of drum and bugle corps led to the incorporation of more popular music, radically different drill routines, and the addition of flag corps for more visual interest. For fall 1968, Mr. Willis began adapting to this new style with the addition of 8 flag girls, as they were called, to the marching band. There were also 3 women in the band officers that year, another first. I'm sure that to some younger directors, Mr. Willis may have seemed a bit traditional, but he never stopped wearing his director's uniform to ball games and to many concerts. The festival performance for 1970 must have been especially satisfying. He programmed Fanfare and Allegro again, the tune from 1965, this time earning straight 1s and a 1 in sight reading.
This was a time of massive change for Central. As Mr. Willis prepared to retire, a modern, new high school was under construction a few blocks away. There is no mention in the annual of Mr. Willis's retirement, but his last drum major was David Stone, from the Stone family mentioned earlier. The band posed, one last time, on the steps of the Presbyterian Church across from the old high school.
One of the band officers was Doug Brown. Doug has had 2 sons in the band and jointly publishes our band website with his wife Denise. Meanwhile, Jack Cannell had decided that Central needed new blood, a fresh start for the new director. Although a number of Mr. Willis's former students were now band directors, Mr. Cannell chose a director with no prior ties to Fountain City. Norman Woodall was a Lebanon, Tennessee native and had been a student of J. Julian at Tennessee Tech in the late 1950s. Norman started on trumpet but changed to French horn at Tech. He also played bass in the jazz ensemble, the Tennessee Tech Troubadours. Dr. Julian helped Mr. Woodall get his first job at Hickson High School in a northern suburb of Chattanooga. After his 10 years in Chattanooga, Mr. Woodall was ready to tackle a new challenge. He was hired by Mr. Cannell and came to Knoxville in the fall of 1970. He spent 1 semester as an assistant director at Bearden High School, but once he was selected to succeed Mr. Willis, he was moved to assist at Central in January 1971. He spent the rest of that year observing, talking to, and learning from Mr. Willis. The ETSBOA Festival number for spring 1971 was Slavonic Rhapsody No. 2, but the judges' sheets are missing. We do still have the judges' sheets from the relatively new at that time Dogwood Arts Concert Band Festival performance. The judges obviously had been told of Mr. Willis's impending retirement, and the written comments are full of praise, both for the band's performance and on Mr. Willis's career. A truly outstanding band in anybody's book, led by the Dean of Tennessee Band Directors, said one judge. Another wrote that he was not going to write a critique. Quote, "I decided to give myself a treat and just listen to this great band. There are few anywhere that compare with it." Finally, one wrote, I again congratulate Mr. Willis on such a long, successful musical career. You have done many young people a favor by helping them to learn music and discipline. The band also took a spring trip to perform in a festival at Six Flags over Georgia. It was judged by several college band directors who were evidently trying to impress the high school directors with their lofty standards. Almost all the bands there got a 3 rating or lower, including Central. Norman told me he was so disappointed that O'Dell, in his last festival performance of his career, got his first and only 3 rating. O'Dell, though, just said something along the lines of, "Well, I don't agree with them at all," and then burned the judges' sheets, literally, as in with matches and flames. As it became known that Mr. Willis was retiring and Mr. Woodall would be his successor, several parents approached Mr. Woodall about the need for new uniforms. The band was still using the set bought in 1958, and parents quickly organized a variety of fundraisers. It was decided to combine the celebration of Mr. Willis's career with the drive for new uniforms. During O'Dell Willis Week, there were fundraising parties, dinners, sales, dances, concerts, and even a parade down Broadway. There was also a scholarship concert at UT with Dr. Julian, Mr. Cannell, Mr. Woodall, and several other Knoxville band directors serving as guest conductors. In addition to funding new uniforms, there was a gift for Mr. Willis, an electronic organ. Many alumni were involved in these ceremonies, including Reba Inkelbarger Haynes, who had a daughter still in the band at the time. Mr. Woodall selected the new uniforms in a tuxedo with overlay style that was similar to the UT band. The exact year is unknown, but sometime during Mr. Willis's final years at Central, the band taped several numbers for a 45 RPM record. It may have been sold as a fundraiser, but a box of them found in the band room was labeled 1971. The recordings of the alma mater and Red and Black heard in this video are from this disc. The record also included the Mad Major March by Alford and a movement of the whole suite in E-flat, a favorite of Mr. Willis's for years. Here's an excerpt from the Mad Major, an excellent example of the stately British march style that is really quite difficult to play. And here's the ending of the march from the Holt Suite. The tone, the intonation, the style, outstanding. But my favorite is the last note. The sustain and ring of the last note are incredible.
It was in the fall of 1972, and it was the first competition I had ever been to, taken my band to as a band director, a high school band director. And O'Dell was the judge, one of the judges for the music. And it just so happened that our band won the class. We came up first place in the class. After the awards and all, I was going to try to find him, and he was trying to find me. And the first thing he did, he just said, "David," and he grasped me and held me, and he hugged me. But we talked for a few minutes. We sat down, and with tears in his eyes and tears in my eyes, we sat and we talked about old times and about what an inspiration he was to me. And we talked about that time he yelled at me when I was late getting out on the field and he was trying to lock the door. And we talked about the time when in the 5th grade when he couldn't find the tuba for me, when he had to search all over Knoxville to find one for me. But he did. But that's the kind of person he was. And I think that's the kind of person that most people remember. Now, yes, in the rehearsal he was stern and he was very demanding. But yet when it came to one-on-one, he was a very warm person, and he loved his kids. He really did.
Although the rest of the Central Band story belongs to Norman Woodall, O'Dell Willis's connection was not quite finished. In 1974, he was one of the Dogwood Arts Festival concert competition judges. About the Central performance, he wrote, "It truly was thrilling for me to hear you again and for you to do such a superb performance. I am proud to have once been a part of this program. Best wishes, O'Dell Willis." Mr. Willis's wife, Hazel, had severe pollen allergies, and the Willises bought a mobile home in Clearwater, Florida. Hazel would spend part of each year there, and as soon as school was out, he would join her. They moved there permanently after his retirement in 1971 at age 66. In 1977, Clearwater just happened to make Knoxville its honored city for its Fun and Sun Festival, and invited Knoxville to send a band to the event. Due to the connection with Mr. Willis, Mr. Woodall successfully lobbied to have Central represent Knoxville. The band had a wonderful trip, performed in the parade, and did a concert with O'Dell guest conducting. The local newspaper ran this extensive article on the Willises. I came to Central in 1982, and in those early years, in fact throughout most of the 80s, Norman and I still taught 4th and 5th grade band every day, and then the two of us would meet at Central about 45 minutes before high school band period started. One day, it had to have been in 82, 83, Norman got a phone call a few minutes before band period, and it was O'Dell Willis on the phone. He would later pass away in 1984, so this had to be in the last 6 to 12 months of his life. Norman asked about his health, which was beginning to fail some. He asked about how the band was doing. Norman told him that he had found a young new assistant that he was happy with, that was working with him, and that the band had a great future still. I've regretted so many times in the past not asking Norman for the phone so that I could at least meet and talk to on the phone Mr. Willis, but I didn't. It was obviously a very personal conversation. I only heard Norman's side of it, but I know that Norman was pretty misty-eyed when he got off the phone. It was as if Mr. Willis one more time wanted to check in on the band and see how things were going. I'm quite certain that it was the last time that they ever spoke. We got the word of the death of O'Dell Willis in late fall 1984. We did a special recognition at a football game and again at our December band concert that year. His portrait hangs today along with Norman Woodall's in the band room at Central. Hazel Willis had health problems much of her life, and the couple was never wealthy. But O'Dell Willis led a life filled with making music and working with young people. I think we can be certain that he would be grateful for those former students who remember him today.